So cardiorespiratory training is probably the most important way to train from a health perspective. If you were considering longevity, we're talking about what actually powers your body. You got to get oxygen to every cell in the body in order for you to actually function and be alive. So if you're an athlete in any discipline, martial arts or otherwise, the I wouldn't say the most important aspect is cardiorespiratory training, but it's an essential aspect of training.
Yeah. It's like you see a lot of boxers go into the ring, they don't have good conditioning, and after the first round, they're gassed and they can't keep fighting.
That's an excellent point. I think also in grappling in particular, you're in positions where it's very exhausting trying to escape from that or even just maintain being held in that position. So a lot of times it's just a matter of who's going to gas out before the other.
Exactly. And they correlate that to being able to survive. So the second you don't have that ability to keep going, the person who can keep going, they're going to have the advantage and they're going to be able to keep pounding on you and you won't be able to defend yourself. So the cardiovascular and the respiratory system, they work hand in hand where your heart pumps all of that blood throughout your body and it takes the oxygen from your lungs and they work together to, transition oxygen into your blood system and then get all of that carbon dioxide out. So the more effective you are at doing that, and the longer endurance you have, you're going to be able to exert that high intensity for longer, and that could save your life.
Welcome to the Unlimited You podcast. Believing firmly in the limitless potential that resides within each individual, your hosts Master Victor Almeida, a distinguished martial arts expert, and Andy Freebird, a holistic health coach specializing in calisthenics, nutrition, and strength training, are here to guide you in unlocking your inner power. Each episode offers practical knowledge from strength training techniques to the calming practices of meditation, tailored to enhance your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Join us on this empowering journey and embrace the warrior that lies within you.
And we're back with myself and Freebird.
How's it going, everybody out there?
So this week we're going to talk about the physical health benefits of martial arts and how it impacts, the good body and stuff. I guess we're going to start off with the cardiovascular and the respiratory system and the effects of martial arts in your whole body. And you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So cardiorespiratory training is probably the most important way to train from a health perspective. If you were considering longevity, we're talking about what actually powers your body. You got to get oxygen to every cell in the body in order for you to actually function and be alive. So if you're an athlete in any discipline, martial arts or otherwise, I wouldn't say the most important aspect is cardiorespiratory training, but it's an essential aspect of training.
Yeah. It's like you see a lot of boxers go into the ring, they don't have good conditioning, and after the first round, they're gassed and they can't keep fighting.
That's an excellent point. I think also in grappling in particular, you're in positions where it's very exhausting trying to escape from that or even just maintain being held in that position. So a lot of times it's just a matter of who's going to gas out before the other.
Exactly. And they correlate that to being able to survive. So the second you don't have that ability to keep going, the person who can keep going, they're going to have the advantage and they're going to be able to keep pounding on you and you won't be able to defend yourself. So the cardiovascular and the respiratory system, they work hand in hand where your heart pumps all of that blood throughout your body and it takes the oxygen from your lungs and they work together to, transition oxygen into your blood system and then get all of that carbon dioxide out. So the more effective you are at doing that, and the longer endurance you have, you're going to be able to exert that high intensity for longer, and that could save your life. Yeah. But I guess, what would be some of the health benefits or health improvements from doing calisthenics or weight training that you would see in your cardiovascular and your respiratory system?
That's a good question. The best way I can answer that, and I think this is a really important aspect of cardio training, is that you're going to adapt to the specific skill that you are practicing. So What I mean by that is that if you are running as your primary means of cardio, you're going to achieve these adaptations that give you greater endurance running, make it so that at efforts that once put you at a higher heart rate eventually don't as easily, right? So you have these adaptations. But then if you go and let's say you're swimming, overall having good cardio conditioning is going to be great, but there's a specific demand imposed for swimming. So with martial arts, for example, ideally, you would want to just train martial arts for a long time to induce, get your heart rate up, get that cardiorespiratory training going. You can take rests. You can do it like HIIT style, high intensity interval training. And it would be great to do other forms of cardio too, but the one that's going to be like the most useful for martial arts is going to be the actual movements that you're going to use in martial arts.
That way you become efficient at those movements rather than like, let's say, swimming or running.
Yeah, and these adaptations are also taking place like at the level of your muscles, at like the cellular level. They're actually mitochondrial adaptations. So if you're, let's say cycling all the time, you're going to induce these in the quads, but not necessarily in your shoulders, your biceps, or other muscles you might use in martial arts.
And that'll be a very specific movement as well.
Yeah.
And I noticed you talked about that your resting heart rate eventually lowers, and that allows your system to essentially use less energy and become more efficient. That way, when you do exert a certain amount of energy, your heart rate doesn't go up as high, you don't burn as much energy because you're just more efficient at using whatever energy you have built up in your muscles and in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the main reasons that this is such an important aspect of longevity.
Yeah. Like if you just train, let's say sparring, striking, and then you go to like a BJJ gym and you start rolling, you're probably going to gas out if you haven't done that because you're going to be using muscles in a different way at a different intensity than you would otherwise be using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this applies to pretty much any adaptation that you're trying to induce on the body. The fastest way to get better at that is to try to simulate that exact thing as closely as possible. Even if you're trying to become stronger in a certain movement, you would want to try to get that movement as specific as possible.
Yeah.
Like a stronger punch if you can emulate that movement.
I guess that kind of leads us right into the next point, which is like muscle toning, strengthening, and mobility enhancement, where the repetition of those specific exercises lead to the refinement of those specific muscle groups. And then you get muscle toning, you get strength in using those specific techniques. Like if you throw 500 side kicks, you're going to be better at throwing a side kick, as provided that you are being mindful and trying to better every time you do it. And, eventually you also see an improvement in mobility where, let's say you practice a side kick at waist level and all of a sudden you start raising it higher and higher. It's going to start stretching the ligaments, the tendons, the muscles, allowing you to have greater range and, be able to strike higher. Yeah. Do you want to talk about more in how the exercises can help strengthen and increase mobility?
Yeah, sure. So first, I guess let's talk a little bit about what mobility is and kind of the difference between flexibility and mobility, because both of these things are important, but they're a little different from each other. So to be flexible means that I could, let's say, take Victor's arm and move it through a large range of motion, where if he wasn't flexible, maybe it would stop here and I can get him like all the way up here, right?
Like being able to reach your hands behind your back.
Sure, yeah. But he might not necessarily have much strength in that range of motion. And so what that actually means is that his ability to produce force or resist force in that range of motion is not necessarily high. Could be, but the flexibility just means like, can we like passively move him through this? So really mobility is the important aspect here. We want to be able to actually utilize these ranges of motion.
Yeah. And that's the functional part of it, where if you just have flexibility, you might be able to throw like a pretty kick, but it might not be effective. It might be really weak and not do anything.
Yeah. So in martial arts, like Victor was saying, by simply performing these movements like a side kick, over time, you're kind of exploring a larger and larger range of motion because everything that actually creates that movement is strengthening and stretching each time that you actually do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And mobility can facilitate, you know, movement in self-defense. So let's say you have very tight hips and you go to throw a kick, you're going to be compromising the rest of your body in order to reach a certain level, where if you've attained that mobility throughout your body, it'll be easier. You won't be compromising your form, and you'll be able to deliver a strike more effectively and, in a sense, I guess better, than you would otherwise. And that comes from training the muscles and having the flexibility. And that's where I think mobility is kind of like a combination of strength, flexibility, and muscle control.
Yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely the fusion of all those things. And one thing I think it's important to point out as well is that with an increase in flexibility alone, you're actually increasing your risk of injury. You now have a larger range within which you can get injured. So it's more important to develop strength in your range of motion the larger your range of motion is. People that have hypermobility and aren't necessarily, there's various genetic conditions that can cause hypermobility, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And those people, if they don't build large enough amounts of strength to actually control their ranges, they're actually a lot more prone to injury than someone that didn't have that hypermobility would be.
So would you say that the reason this happens is because the muscles provide better blood flow or resistance when, let's say, you get an impact, the muscle has
It's force resistance. Yeah. So remember, like, strength isn't just the ability to produce force. It's also the counter force, can it be resisted, right, as well. So if you're extremely mobile, but you don't have strength through your ranges of motion, you can't actually resist force. You even just think about the force that it takes to absorb taking a step on the ground every time that you plant one foot in front of the other walking.
Yeah, that makes me think of the application where we train getting hit in the abdomen.
Right. And absorbing that impact.
Yeah. And you have to practice essentially tightening your abdomen at the right time, and you have to have the strength to be able to create essentially a shield. And the stronger you are, the more force you can take on without actually injuring your organs or getting hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And, the more you train, the more toned your muscles are essentially going to be. And I guess toning comes from a combination, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of like fat percentage and muscle mass.
I would say that's most of it. So that's nearly exactly right. In addition to that, though, as you pointed out with mobility, there is a muscle control aspect. So you have to be able to consciously solidify muscle. So in the example you gave with solidifying your abdomen, what's going on here as well is that over time, through practice, you can train your mind to more strongly contract a muscle, in this case, the rectus abdominis, the six pack, as well as the underlying, diaphragmatic wall, transverse abdominis, all your core muscles. They're drawing really tight. So in studies that have been done on muscle control, most people have the highest ability in their biceps. I think.
Trying to show off the bicep.
Exactly. Just because you can see it easily. You can't see every muscle and just try to, you can touch it and see how solid you can make it. But I would imagine like a pro bodybuilder could probably do this with, almost every muscle. Yes, perfect example. Like if you look at The Rock, makes his pecs dance back and forth. Terry Crews too. Shout out to Terry Crews and The Rock.
So good.
Yeah.
And Squat University, I was watching something where they teach you how to essentially engage your core for lifting heavy weights.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people,
bracing.
Yeah. Well, they'll have essentially not enough strength, or they don't activate their core and they go to lift and they'll injure themselves. Where if you push in here on your abdomen and you push out, you should be able to feel that hardness.
Yep.
And maintain that hardness throughout a whole lift.
Right. And that's exactly the same premise as contracting these muscles here to absorb an impact in martial arts.
Exactly.
Just applied a little bit differently.
Very interesting. And that kind of correlates to weight management and fat loss, where the heavier you are, the more mass you have to move. It requires more muscle. And usually this is not always the case because you see some really big people can move really fast, but that's hard to do. But the heavier you are, the harder it is for you to move fast and well in most circumstances.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you have some people who weigh like 300 pounds and can do a bunch of pull-ups, but those are very extreme cases, you know?
Yeah.
And that directly correlates to fat loss, where the repeated training, you know, constant training is going to burn fat. And we usually do that through calisthenics or strength training that increases your metabolic rate and allows you to burn fat while you're sitting down. And that essentially enhances your physical, like the maximum output of your body, so that you're not as restricted, you're not as heavy. And the lighter you are, the more effective your muscles are going to be. So where you could do, let's say 10 pull-ups at 180 pounds, let's say you lose 10 pounds, you're going to be able to do a little bit more pull-ups. And let's say that was mostly all fat that you lost, you were going to become more efficient at those movements.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you want to speak more about like how calisthenics and strength training can really benefit the weight management and your fat loss?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll probably start with just explaining the relationship between like size and strength, essentially, right? Which is an example that Victor gave about losing weight and doing pull-ups. What's happening is that your strength to weight ratio is increasing. So in general, the lighter a person is, the higher their potential for strength to weight is, which is why most body weight world records for body weight strength are actually held by children. They're held usually by child gymnasts, because they're so light, but they can just be all muscle, you know?
Yeah.
But then on the other end of the spectrum, the records that are held for the most, what we call absolute strength, which means like what's the heaviest object you could pick up. Those are held by the heaviest people typically, or extremely big heavy people. If you look at, like, think about like the Mountain from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
He, I think, was 2-time world's strongest man. You can check out and see it at least once.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And what is that guy, like 7 feet tall or something crazy?
Literal mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is you want to have low body fat, right? And it's for men, the athlete range is considered about 8 to 12% body fat. And for women, it's going to be a little higher, because if you get too lean as a man or a woman, you start to impede a hormone function. It's going to have a bunch of different adverse side effects.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's this certain disease, I forgot the name, where you have almost no body fat and it can actually become painful in sitting and doing normal movements.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
So
I've been, I think, as lean as like 5% body fat.
That's hard to get there.
It's hard to get there. And it was, at first it didn't feel too bad. And it was like after like, I want to say 3-4 weeks that I was like, I hit a wall. I just wanted to eat everything in sight. That had to be the most calories I ever consumed, was like the few weeks after I hit that wall. Just, could not stop. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about calisthenics and for weight loss, I think a lot of people have this misconception that there's cardio exercises and then there's other exercises for building strength. That's not actually true. In order to burn calories, you just have to move. And the problem is that when you have weight that's heavy, you hit the wall you hit first is muscular failure. So that impedes you from like really getting to a high heart rate, right? Where with the cardio exercises, what we're going for is getting to that maximal heart rate. The heart and lungs is primarily what we're training. So with body weight movements, you can also use this to burn a lot of calories because they're low resistance. And the way you want to do this, like I was explaining before, if you're trying to be good at martial arts, you don't need to necessarily have the endurance to like bike a long way. You need to be able to like throw a lot of kicks, throw a lot of punches, resist somebody trying to pull you in different positions.
Yes.
And so it makes the most sense to do body weight type exercises. They're going to simulate the movements they're doing in martial arts in a style that we call high intensity interval training. So when you do get gassed out, you're going to rest a little bit. And this is really important because to really build efficiency, you actually don't want to be at 100% of your maximal heart rate. when you do that, you actually impede this adaptation called stroke volume, which is how much blood does your heart pump, like per pump. That adaptation actually takes place more efficiently at like about 80%. When you're firing at 100, the heart doesn't even have time to like fully open and fill to its full volume.
It can be dangerous.
It can be dangerous too, which is an excellent point.
Yeah.
So if you don't have any kind of underlying conditions, like for your heart, for example, you can and should go to 100 sometimes.
Yeah.
But if you do have a problem, you should never go to 100. And even if you don't have any issues, you shouldn't go to 100 all the time.
Yeah.
That's dangerous for anybody.
A short amount of time if you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you were saying made me think about the correlation of strength training calisthenics to the metabolic rate and how it eventually increases your metabolism so that you're burning through the food that you eat a little bit faster. You're burning through your fat as you sit down. Can you talk more about that?
Well, so the primary factor in metabolism, like as far as how many calories you burn in a day, is going to be your activity level. So, the more that you move and the higher intensity that movement is, like the more calories you're going to burn in that day. Now, over time, your metabolism can raise via a number of factors. The primary thing that's going to raise your metabolism, so having a high metabolism isn't necessarily a good thing, because the people with the highest metabolisms are actually obese. You think about what fat actually is. It's energy potential.
Yeah.
You're like storing all this energy around yourself, like a potential battery for your body to tap into. So if you have too much of it, your body's going like, we need to get rid of this. It's not efficient. As Victor, you were saying earlier about being heavy and doing calisthenics, it takes a lot of energy to like move a big heavy body around.
Yeah.
So your body's like, this isn't efficient. Like we need to burn this all off. And typically people that are like super skinny, they actually have very low metabolic rate.
Interesting.
Yeah. Muscle will raise your metabolism because it has a lot of blood flow.
Okay.
So what you would want to do is have like, a higher metabolism because you have low body fat. You're like carrying a lot of muscle, but not so much muscle that you're cumbersomely heavy.
Yeah.
Right? Like just because you are muscular doesn't mean it's to your advantage with calisthenic exercises. Like I illustrated, like the mountain is never going to beat a gymnastic kid at like a handstand push-up contest.
He's not going to be Usain Bolt on a sprinting contest.
Right,
either.
but they're not going to lift anywhere near. So you have to understand, even if you're pure muscle, do you want to be better at bodyweight exercises or do you want to be better at absolute strength? Because you honestly, there's a sweet spot in the middle. We could get into that at some point. I've done a lot of research on that. But in general, if you want to be the best at one or the other, like now you do have to, you have to pick. Yeah.
Yeah. And being in that middle gives you the strength and the mobility, which is what we're looking for in martial arts. And that increases the function of all the moves, where you want to achieve speed, strength, and mobility all at the same time, which is very hard to do. And you do that, like Freebird was saying, through high interval training, hypertrophy training, repetition, speed training, which we're going to have a whole episode on speed later on. So check that out later. And it's creating that balance. And if you just lean on one side, then you're going to end up lacking on another. And would you say that the training through at least strength training calisthenics has an impact on the bone and muscle density and your joint health?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, so any kind of resistance training is going to increase, we'll start with bone mineral density, is going to increase bone mineral density. And what that means is essentially like your bones are harder. That translates not only to them being harder to break, but actually having higher strength potential as well. So in experiments that have been done on this, the resistance level that induced the most efficient increase in bone mineral density was really high, like about 2 to 3 times your body weight.
Oh.
Most people probably can't lift 2 to 3 times their body weight if they're not athletes.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But it's a lot, but it's a really, I think, a really basic like athletic standard. So if you are training martial arts, I would recommend building up your strength to that level. I would say the best measure of that is probably the squat or the deadlift. A person, bench pressing 2 to 3 times their body weight is very difficult.
Yeah.
I think 3 times may be impossible. I've met a couple people that could do 2 times, but 2 to 3 times is kind of entry to intermediate strength level, I would say, in at least as far as powerlift for squat and deadlift.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good goal to have. It'll make your bones and skeleton way stronger.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they recommend that a lot for kids who are going through puberty. They're getting taller, and you see a lot of kids sometimes start breaking their legs because they're growing and their bones aren't as dense.
Yeah.
So weightlifting can help increase the density of your bones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the ways I would say this is a very different application. We do a conditioning where we punch hard objects and create micro fractures on our knuckles or the point of impact.
Yeah.
And those micro fractures then heal up denser, stronger bone.
Yes.
But that's a very different type of bone.
Well, no, it's actually not that different. No. So,
this method.
So this is a good segue to like the other thing that maximally increases bone mineral density when they actually do research on this. So you think about like the actual forces imposed on the bone can be imposed by the force of impact. It doesn't have to be because the weight itself is so heavy that it's compressing the bone in the case of like a deadlift or a squat, right? So with what you're talking about, striking an object, you're striking that object with a tremendous amount of force that's compressing the bone almost as if you were lifting a large amount of weight. So another way that you can maximally increase bone mineral density is sprinting. Because when you sprint, you collide with the ground about 2 to 3 times the actual weight of your body. And that's enough force to actually create greater density through primarily the posterior chain, your legs.
Interesting. That's where running form really becomes very important so that you can save your knee and your ankle joints and not having the wrong impact.
We could do a whole episode on running
just
form
running,
because
yeah.
that's one I really am passionate about that one. So,
Yeah. And exercising also increases the muscle density where, let's say, you don't lift, you're not doing calisthenics or push-ups, you're not going to be able to, have as much padding for defense. And let's say you have these really bulky people. Sometimes for example, Bruce Lee, he was not the biggest guy, but he was exceptionally strong because his muscle density was off the charts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking here about hypertrophy mainly.
Yes.
So, we're throwing around some terms that not everyone may be familiar with. So I'll take a moment just to define. So hypertrophy is what we call an increase in the cross-sectional diameter of the muscle. It just means that if the muscle is getting thicker, like if we actually were to measure it along the cross-section, the thickest part of the muscle, is it enlarging over time? So the most clear example of this would be like a professional bodybuilder. They have prioritized hypertrophy, which is muscle density, over everything else. And speaking of Bruce Lee, shortly before, or I guess at the time of his death, he was becoming very interested in bodybuilding and hypertrophy training. He realized that he had a limitation in his overall mass, and he wanted to actually become a little bit larger. Ultimately, mass moves mass, which is the whole reason that absolute strength increases. So as it pertains to how hard you can punch or kick, if you are more massive, you can transmit more force.
Yes.
Bruce Lee had incredible control over his body.
Yes.
So despite not being particularly massive, I mean, what do you think? He probably weighed 140 or something like that, if even.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but
I would guess somewhere between 135, 145 for Bruce Lee. But the amount of force he could generate, if you ever watch his famous with the 6-inch punch and the 1-inch punch, is unbelievable. The efficiency.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a lot through technique as well. Yeah. And the muscle density becomes extremely important when taking an impact, in supporting your joint health as well. Because let's say, for example, I've just recently hurt myself landing from a very far jump. If I had stronger leg muscles when I had landed, I would have been able to take that impact more on my muscles rather than, let's say, my tendons. So having stronger muscles, especially, shoulders, knees, elbows, can really reduce the potential for injury in martial arts and in exercising and in everyday life too. And how would you say that correlates to joint health?
Well, so there's one more protective benefit that I think is really important. I want to illustrate too, which is hypertrophy of the neck is extremely important in combat sports.
Yes.
And any kind of contact sport as well. So if that includes like football, rugby. You look at how these guys train, they actually do training specifically for their neck.
Yes.
Because it will act as a shock absorber for your brain ultimately within the skull. So it's not just a matter of like being a good fighter, it's a matter of safety. Like protect the brain at all costs. So yeah.
Like Formula One drivers, they exceptionally train the neck.
Oh, really?
A lot of G forces. You can't hold your head up after a certain point. You take 2-3 laps in a full speed F1 car. The majority of us, our neck muscles would be dead after that. And these guys are doing like 70 laps, taking 4 or 5 Gs. They're essentially flying an aircraft.
I never thought of that, but that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Interesting.
So as far as like joint protection, having a stronger muscle can put more of that tension into the muscle belly, which is going to be further from the joints. You think about like any movement, you move between extension or flexion of that joint. So the joint angle closing is going to be flexion, the joint angle opening is going to be extension. And the more that we can bring the tension into the muscle belly, which is usually like the intermediate point, right? The less we can have that tension here. We can kind of use this to keep it off of there.
Yeah, and as you age, that allows you to keep your mobility. As things start to deteriorate, if we can take the stress off of the tendons and the ligaments and put them into the muscle, and keep the muscle strong, that's going to increase your mobility as you age, and we'll get more into that later.
Yes, we do want to actually strengthen the joints as well, the connective tissue as well. And connective tissue doesn't get the same amount of blood flow that muscle tissue does. So it takes a little bit longer to adapt, and it takes a little bit longer to recover from as well. So you always want to be mindful of that. You may be able to muscularly tolerate a really high amount of frequency and volume of training, but not realize that it's causing your joints to become inflamed or degrade even.
Yeah. And maybe when you feel it, it might be too late.
Yeah. So just, be mindful of that. Like I rock climb every week, and there's so much strain on the connective tissue, primarily in my hands and forearms, that I only do it once a week. Like I feel the rest of my body, my muscles, I don't even get sore. My muscles don't even get sore.
It's all in the fingers and
it's all just my fingers and tendons. And I try to climb really hard so I can like induce that adaptation, right? I'll like be there for hours until I'm just like worn out completely. And then I'll go, okay, even though my muscles feel totally fine, I'm going to give this a whole week of nutrition and sleep to rebound from it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you don't do stuff like that, your connective tissue is going to be weak, and then you're going to be even more prone to injury.
Yeah. And I've also seen a correlation between, physical exercise, especially martial arts training and the way we do it, and improving of sleep and energy levels. Where when I first started really training, you could maybe go like an hour or two, and then you'd be completely dead. By, let's say year 4 or 5, that became a warm up, and it would be 4 or 5 hours of high intensity training that then I would start to feel it. Then, I would have my energy would feel infinite almost, not necessarily, but from what it used to be. And then I'd get home, I'd be completely tired, and I'd pass out like a baby and sleep for like 8 to 10 hours. Yeah. So, do you know any correlation between essentially exercising and the benefits of sleep? And
totally.
Yeah.
Well, you think about it, when you're exercising, the demand for energy production and efficiency of, oxygenation, like we talked about with the cardio training, is much higher than when I'm just walking around doing, things that aren't that strenuous, right? So the whole system is like optimizing over time. you're inducing these adaptations that don't just make you better at running or climbing or doing pull-ups or throwing punches, whatever it may be. Everything you do is being enhanced. You're actually you're becoming more efficient at tissue oxygenization and everything. So I think that's a big part of it. And I also think that, at least for me, like I always had trouble falling asleep. Like I would stay up too late, have a lot of insomnia. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that struggle with that issue in particular. I find that if I don't burn a certain amount of energy in a day, it's pretty hard for me to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there's also a lot of mental benefits to working out and to martial arts, right? And I think that's part of having more energy too, because sometimes it's like somebody says they're drained, they're tired. It's like, well, are you physically tired? Are you mentally tired? Is it both?
Yeah,
There's different elements to that too.
absolutely.
If you go too far with training, though, you'll start to notice an opposite effect. You
Yes.
start overtraining, you wake up and you're like, I need to go back to sleep for another couple hours. You'll know.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where, overtraining can become a real detriment. And like everything else we do, there has to be a good balance in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that essentially kind of affects your immune system and your ability to prevent diseases. So where, you're exercising, you've increased all of the blood flow, the ability to, convert oxygen into your blood system. You're increasing all of these things in your body. I've also noticed that throughout my training, I've been healthier where, let's say like 10 of my students get sick, I might get a little sniffle for a few days and they're bedridden for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So like my resistance to getting sick also increased.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. If I could share a little bit about my childhood, actually. So I used to get sick every year. And for whatever reason, it would always be like right before Thanksgiving.
Oh,
It was like an annual, and I would like feel it coming. I'd be like, I know what's going to happen.
yeah.
I didn't really exercise a whole lot
Hmm.
when I was a kid. I was more interested in art, so I would spend most of my time drawing. Then once I started exercising as an adult, I basically stopped getting sick at a certain point, and I've only gotten sick twice in the last 8 years
Nice.
of my life.
Yeah.
So I want to share that story with everybody so you understand, like, I've gone from one extreme to the other. I've actually lived both these scenarios,
Yeah.
and the difference that being physically fit and healthy makes is like unbelievable. It's a very extreme difference, really, black and white, night and day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And before I really got fully deep in my training, I actually went to the hospital for stress-induced stomach issues. And, after I changed my diet, after I increased my training regimen, I started taking care of the things I was putting in my body. I've had a very similar experience where, since probably in the last 10 years, maybe 8 years, I can't really think of exactly when, I've probably gotten sick like 3 times. Once was with COVID, and then another, I got a flu, and I was only out for like a day or 2.
One of my two was the Cove.
Yeah.
Also,
You
it got me too.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah. Yeah. And, that directly correlates with our digestive system as well.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, where a lot of the things we're taking into our body, they're breaking down in your stomach, and all that bacteria in there is responsible for, keeping you healthy, essentially. It improves your ability to digest food. It improves your immune system literally directly by, let's say you get sick, you have the ability and the certain bacteria to help manage that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that gets increased, in my opinion, and maybe you've done some research on this, where, the exercise and living that healthier lifestyle can really benefit that.
Definitely. Well, so the main thing was diet
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the gut. there's nothing, there's a lot of things on the market that can improve your gut health, like probiotics, various supplements, but none of those things will help you if your diet is unhealthy. That's by far the most important aspect, and cutting out things that are unhealthy for you. Even when it comes to food, you can't think like, oh, well, if I eat a bunch of blueberries and strawberries today, it outweighs me drinking a liter bottle of soda.
Yeah,
So it's mainly cutting out the things that are unhealthy.
Yeah. Like for me, I was drinking a lot of coffee, soda, and those were really the big two. So I had a lot of acid going into my stomach. I would eat acidic foods, and that changed the content of my stomach. It was just acidic all the time. And then on top of that, I was drinking sugar, which goes right into my system. And so I started to get pretty chubby. So when I cut both of those out, and I still drink coffee, but not 4 cups a day. I drink like 1. And
coffee is not bad for you, by the way. It's just acidic. So with Victor already having his pH off in the stomach, just really made it worse.
Exactly. And I was eating like acidic foods on top of that, so it was just compounding. And once I became more conscious about the foods I was putting into my system, it started to make me feel better. I started to feel healthier, have more energy, and that was probably the biggest thing that I did to get me on course.
Yeah. Cutting out what was actually throwing your gut out of whack the most.
Yeah. And we're having a whole episode on nutrition and the dietary things. So
there's a lot to talk about with that one. For sure. Yeah. And it's super important. So it really deserves its own episode, I think.
Yeah. I would say the biggest changes for me was cutting out soda and juice. Yeah.
I was never like a huge soda drinker.
Yeah.
I've been eating really healthy for a long time now that I think about it. But when I was a kid, it was like the worst. Like just like chicken nuggets and like Girl Scout cookies was like my daily diet, basically. Like
I was sweet too. It was hard not to like have little sweets all the time. Yeah. That's a big one. Absolutely.
I mean, I do love sweets too.
Yeah.
Just don't do it every day. Don't eat sugar all day.
Yeah.
Don't like. All I can say on that, and then I guess we'll move off of nutrition, is like, at least for me, if you never ever eat ice cream or a cookie or anything, it's like, yeah, you got to live a little bit. Like, come on. It'll help you do all these other healthy things if you're like not depriving yourself.
Exactly.
Enjoying your life. Like,
Yeah.
At Fera Academy, we believe every person has unlimited potential waiting to be unleashed. Join our academy and discover your inner power through disciplines like Taekwondo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, martial arts weapons, and more. Our experienced instructors empower you with the skills, strength, and wisdom to become an unstoppable warrior. Train in a focused, inclusive environment where you'll progress quickly. Learn meditation, nutrition, and breathing techniques to develop a balanced body, mind, and spirit. Uncover your true potential and prepare for life's challenges at Fera Academy. Start your journey. Visit feraacademy.com today.
And I feel like all of these things we've talked about have a direct correlation to essentially your brain and your cognitive functions. So, the more you exercise, after you exercise, you have like this rush of endorphins. And I can often think clearer. So especially if I exercise earlier in the day, I won't feel tired around 3 or 4 o'clock. I'll have like this boost of energy. I'll be able to think clearer. I'll be able to focus better. And I've noticed that I also think faster.
Yeah.
Where I'm not as lethargic in my thinking because like I'm more active. I'm more focused and ready for things. So I become more efficient in the things I do.
Yeah.
And I think that is really underestimated in creating a really healthy lifestyle is you start thinking better. Yeah. And, have you experienced the same?
I absolutely have. That's actually one of the biggest appeals to me about going to the gym or exercising, or, whether I'm trail running, lifting weights, climbing, whatever it is is I get into that endorphin release.
Mm-hmm.
I find that it's most powerful with cardio. I can reach it fastest. And actually, for whatever reason, elliptical machine, that's the fastest way that I can get to that high sensation, or what they call a runner's high,
Yeah.
where it actually, when you reach that point, for you out there who might not be familiar with this term, a runner's high, if you push yourself really hard running, you can kind of break past this point where you almost get a second wind.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like you're on a drug. It's like this, it feels like you're in a state of bliss.
Yeah.
You might even cry tears of joy.
Yeah.
It's so blissful feeling.
Absolutely.
So I can reach that fastest with an elliptical for some reason, even faster than running. Maybe because my arms, my upper body is like also being taxed and moving, not just my legs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as far as like the after effect, something that people should be mindful of is that, just like we talked about sleep being impacted by overtraining, same thing is true here. If you exercise, you're probably going to have this boost in mental performance for a little while after, maybe even the rest of the day. If you really work out to the point that you're like killing yourself, probably not. You're probably going to be pretty drained and feel pretty tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you get to the point where you puke, you might have a headache.
Yeah, exactly.
You
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I get that when I spar or when I roll. That's probably the fastest one I get, because you get to when you have to defend yourself against somebody, your body releases adrenaline, and
Oh, yeah.
you get to the state where your output of energy is higher than normally training. And every time I spar, I feel like I'm on top of the world. And I'll get that second win, and I'll be able to go for hours.
I think there's an added element to sparring that you're bringing up, is that like there's something about facing a human adversary that like gets your blood up almost in a way that you don't get from any other means of exercise.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And in training martial arts, when you have that other person, you test yourself more. You're able to find your own weaknesses. They show you your weaknesses, and that's how you grow. And you get not only the enhanced, chemical effects of it, but you also get to learn more. And if you're a person who approaches martial arts and you're trying to grow, that feels amazing as well. And this is where I think that martial arts really provides a good stress outlet, where you're punching things, you're kicking things, you're moving and exerting energy, and it releases stress, and all of this built up energy in you, it releases and it clears you out. And that also has a very long lasting effect throughout your day, maybe a few weeks or months, depending on how often you're training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think something interesting that maybe you might have experienced too. So for those of you out there that have other creative endeavors, maybe you're an artist or a musician. So Victor, we haven't really talked about this. He's an incredible artist. He actually is a glass blower as well.
The pumpkin.
Yeah. I wish I could give you a tour of the whole room. And I'm a musician. And so what I've noticed, I'm curious if you've noticed this too, that sometimes after I get some exercise, after I go home, my creative capacity is a little bit heightened. It's a little bit easier for me to like write a song, for example, afterwards. But if I go too far, then I'm like too tired. But like just a little bit, kind of get that blood flowing, and kind of have my brain woken up a little bit from exercise.
Yeah.
And then I'm able to, at least yesterday, that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
Got back from a hike, and I just felt my mind, body, soul was like lit up. Sat down and just immediately wrote a guitar solo. I didn't even have to try.
Yeah.
It just kind of came out.
You open that flow state. Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts on that? Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean I'm used. My ideal day would be if I can like train martial arts, blow glass, and then do all the things I love to do all in one day.
Yeah, and that's how the order you would do it.
Yeah. Because like you feel that.
Yeah.
You feel more awake, and honestly, it like increases your confidence level and increases your tuning with yourself, where it gets the mind out of the way, where you're always thinking. Your brain is trained to run thoughts. Like we're receiving all of these thoughts all the time. And when you do your exercise, what it does is it focuses your brain on this moment. You have
Yeah.
to focus on controlling your body in a very specific way. And it trains your mind to bring the awareness here and now.
Yeah.
And then you take that and then you move it to a different outlet, and it makes it easier to channel it towards that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest appeals too. I'm a pretty chronic overthinker, so anything that brings me into the moment is appealing,
Yeah.
you know. And whether it's martial arts or anything that brings you into the body, you can't really be thinking about anything else, or you wouldn't be able to actually do whatever it is you're doing,
Yeah.
whether it's a pull-up or whether it's sprinting, whether it's sparring.
Absolutely. I agree. And getting back to, I guess, how this affects aging, right? So I started training when I was 8, and I got my black belt, I think, when I was like 12. And then I stopped training for a little bit, got into football, went to college, came back, started training again. And what I've noticed from when I was like 25 to now 35 is my body is not the same as it was. And I'm only 35. You know, I can still do amazing things, but, you know, my healing time is definitely longer.
Yeah.
You know, the rehabilitation time after I exercise, I'm sore longer than I used to be. But I've also noticed that if I don't train, I'll get injured faster. I'll have more lack of mobility. I remember the first probably 3 months of COVID, where the pandemic, where everything shut down, and, you know, I had to, you know, really create my own training schedule to maintain that health. And for like the first month or two, I wasn't really doing a good job. And I felt that difference where, you know, I couldn't move as well. My back started aching again.
Yeah.
And it took, you know, a lot of determination and focus. And what I've realized is that, you know, if I keep up with my training as I get older, and, you know, we have other examples. There's senior masters and grandmasters who are still training at like 70 and 80 years old, that if you keep it going, you age more gracefully. Your muscles retain that strength a lot easier, because as you age, you're not going to be able to build muscle as efficiently as you are when you're 20 years old. And, you know, your tendons and your ligaments are going to start to become a little bit weaker. So maintaining that strength throughout your muscles is going to help you age better, is going to retain your mobility, your strength, your flexibility. Do you want to speak on that? Aging?
Yeah, well, so the first thing I want to point out is that I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. So Victor, you're 35 right now, but, you know, the man has no wrinkles. He has no gray hair. He moves amazingly. He's highly athletic, maybe one or two under a microscope. So any athlete is going to start to realize what you were saying, that you start to, like, your capacity for recovery does start to decelerate a little bit.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is, I think you can actually just get away with things when you're young that you shouldn't have done anyway. But you know what I mean? Like, as far as training and athletics, there were a lot of things I could get away with when I was 20 that at 35, I know better, but I never should have done those things anyway.
Yeah.
You know, now as far as getting older and losing, you know, muscle and bone and everything like that, the main reason that this happens is that people just move less and less. Like, when you actually look at the data, like, that's the main factor that's actually generating that problem. So I saw a video the other day of a guy that was like 70 or in his 70s, at least 70, deadlifting like a huge amount of weight. Like, it was like, I think at least 405, which for somebody in that age range is like unheard of. And he didn't even start doing it until he was fairly old.
Wow.
Like, so you can build up. So they did an X-ray also on this guy to check his bone mineral density, so we can, like, you know, kind of think back to a little while ago. We were talking about how the deadlift increases how dense your bones are, and they said he was like 99th percentile for his age.
Wow.
The reason was the exercise.
Okay.
If you lift weights, you do martial arts, you do all this stuff, you're not going to be at 70, 80. You're not going to look the way that you think people that age look.
Yeah.
Because when you look at people that are 70 and 80, very few of them ate healthy and meditated and practiced martial arts and lifted weights and connected with nature through hiking and climbing and all that stuff. Almost none of those people did. If you look at people that actually do that stuff, they are still in incredible health with incredible strength in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah. And actually, one of the people who really got me deeper into calisthenics is a parent of one of our students. His name's Duke. He's probably in his late 50s, early 60s. Sorry if I butchered your age there, Duke. But the man can do 12 pull-ups with a 75-pound weight attached to him. Do levers, do muscle ups with weights. It is unreal. And he's in his, I think, 60s. I'm not sure. Sorry, man.
That's insane. That's actually insane.
And he said he started doing these exercises in his late 40s.
Interesting.
Yeah, because he wanted to stay mobile as his daughter got older. Yeah.
Huh.
And now he's a beast. He's a beast.
I myself have seen a couple examples like that in person too. So, you know, there are people out there. I've met a couple people in their 60s that were incredibly strong, incredibly fit. You know, this one guy, before I moved here at the gym I was at, I think he was 62 or something like that. And he could do a one-arm lever where you're like balanced on your elbow like this, balanced his whole body like that just perfectly. It's very impressive, yeah.
Yeah. And that just comes from maintaining and progressing your training rather than giving up and saying my back hurts.
Yeah, well, so you mentioned back pain.
Yeah.
And so I had an injury not too long ago, and I've been, I would say, blessed to have never had like a serious injury. But there's another element to that, which is I like tried to be, you know, careful and take my recovery and health seriously so I don't get injured. But I had to be in bed for like a couple weeks. I couldn't really move a whole lot. And what I noticed was afterwards, my back was all weird and achy just from not moving.
Yeah.
So one of the easiest ways to actually get injured is to just avoid moving. Then you're like, you're not adapted to be able to resist, you know, force in really any direction.
One of my most recent injuries is 2 years ago now was from sitting. I was working online at the time. During the pandemic, everything closed, so I got an online job. And I sat wrong on a chair for 8 hours, and I developed this pain on my mid-glute, on my lower back. And when I started moving, when I brought heat into it, when I started doing rehabilitation exercises, it really started to improve. But then if I lay down for too long, I would feel that pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you know, I think it's pretty clear to most people now that sitting is bad for you.
Yeah.
At least, you know, at this point, I think the general populace like knows that. When they do, hopefully, when they do studies on like mortality, you know, longevity, what they find is that like the best indicator of someone's health in old age is actually the relaxed pace of their walking. So if they're just walking at a normal pace, meaning they're not trying to walk fast or be in a hurry, the faster that pace is, the longer their life expectancy is projected to be. So the less you're sitting and the more you're moving, the better. I mean, that's the takeaway from that data. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And, you know, if you are sitting, for example, throughout the day, I still work as a software engineer, so I have to sit for part of my job until we get, you know, this training thing fully going. I have to get up every minimum 2 hours. If I don't, I can feel it in my body.
That's a long time. I'm surprised you're going that long. That's a lot longer than I recommend.
And as like working in software, you get in that flow state.
I know. I do know exactly what you mean. It's like, yeah.
And so, when you break it, it takes like 15 minutes just to get back down. Yeah.
I mean, there's people out there that are sitting at their office desk probably way longer than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like I like to get up, do squats, do some hip rotations, do movements that bring in heat to my hips,
Mhm.
because as you're sitting, your gluteus maximus is going to sleep, and a lot of your tension goes to the outside of the hips, the top of the mid glutes over here, and you start feeling lower back pain. Your lumbar starts to go out. So not only sitting correctly, but getting up and getting blood moving through your hips is going to help prevent that onset of pain and injury. Yeah.
Yeah, ideally, I mean, I understand if people need to sit for long periods of time. Sometimes there's not anything you can do about that given your particular line of work. But ideally, I would say every 30 minutes to get up,
That'd
and
be
you
ideal.
don't need to do a bunch of exercises. You literally get up and you just want to spend a few seconds mobilizing your hips, shoulders, and spine. That's it.
Mhm.
You can get back to it. Honestly, it doesn't need to take longer than 1 minute. When I was before I got to the point where I amassed, all the knowledge and certifications I have now, I would study every single day and for hours and hours. And I just every 30 minutes, let's set a timer, 30 minutes, set a timer 1 minute, hips, shoulders, spine, sit back down 30 minutes. Just
That's a
over
good
and over.
method.
Yeah.
And, you have some people who have standing desks now and they can move while they're doing that.
Yeah, there's like treadmill desks, all
Yeah.
kinds of solutions. Yeah.
But even standing for too long can be bad.
Yes, that's very
Yeah.
true too. I mean, actually, like that's something that you need to practice even.
Standing straight.
Standing straight. We talked about that. Me and Victor went to had a rehab day
Yeah.
last week at the
Oh, good.
aquatic center. So we did some underwater movements to strengthen and loosen the connective tissue in the lower body, and then some hot tubs, kind of loosen everything further, and then meditate in the sauna.
Yeah.
We were talking about standing meditation.
Yes.
You're just trying to stack your skeleton, stack your bones in the most efficient way, and it's also useful to practice this sitting too. You can sit in lotus pose and do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Through our meditation course at Ananda Village, we're learning the style of Kriya Yoga. And they've actually taught us that the reason that yoga was created was to allow yogis to sit in meditation longer.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that way you could sit longer without being in pain, stacking the
'Cause it's
spine,
hard. It's
relaxing.
hard to sit a long
Yeah.
time.
It like after we come out of a 30 or 45-minute meditation, everything's all cold and sore, and
Yeah.
it's necessary.
You like get up slowly.
Yeah, and then some of them will meditate for like 8 hours. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That makes a lot of sense though.
Yeah.
They're just trying to like maximize the comfort of being able to, like the more comfortable you are, the more you can be focusing on the meditation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And as part of Kriya Yoga is a lot of energization and moving exercises that, brings heat into the body, moves certain areas, and it creates the benefits that we're talking about that let you sit longer. And I guess the last thing we can talk about here today is the increased healing time that you get from, creating this lifestyle, from exercising. When you do get hurt, your muscles can have better blood flow. So more blood is getting to different regions of your body, helping increase or reduce that healing time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something I've really seen the impacts of, where, I've had a lot of injuries throughout my life. I've like fractured my spine, broken each one of my legs, one of them several times, like broken bones in my hands and things. And what I've noticed from when I was younger to when I really got serious in my training is I would get injured, and at the time I could be able to exercise with a very small injury, or I would be able to take a shorter kind of absence from my training and heal quicker, rather than being like out 3 weeks, I'd be out 1 week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's sort of what I was saying before about you can get away with more
Yeah.
the younger you are. So I think the younger you realize that doesn't last forever, the better.
Yeah.
That you can start, because ideally we should have always, really prioritized recovery and injury prevention and everything like that.
Mhm.
But one of the mistakes people make when they get injured is they try not to move at all.
Yeah.
And actually, the research is demonstrating that you want to continue to move that area just within whatever range you can, without pain, and just very slowly progress to achieving the same movement ability and strength that you had prior to injury there. But it actually accelerate healing to move.
Yeah. Just like when you break your arm here and you can do very gentle finger movements to get blood and movement through that area, stimulates the healing.
Well, and also we got to think about different types of injury, right? Because there's injury to connective tissue, to bone, there's injury to muscular tissue. And when it comes to muscular tissue, what happens is that when you get injured, the muscle tissue itself trying to recover, it doesn't always heal properly. It actually causes like scar tissue to form in the muscle. So there's this principle, it's called Davis's law. And what that law dictates is that whatever the direction of force is that the muscle experiences, the muscle is going to restructure in that direction. So that in a lot of cases, it's going to restructure basically like at a cross-section direction to the way that the muscle runs. Let's say that you have your bicep and it's running in this, the fibers are running in this direction. And you don't want to have the muscle thickening in this direction. It's going to create these bands of scar tissue, this sort of inflexible matrix that keep the muscle from expanding and contracting properly. So with a muscular injury, it's especially important to make sure you maintain movement through that area so that it can structure itself at the cellular level properly and not actually inhibit the muscle's function over time.
Because if it does that, you're going to reduce your mobility, increase your chance of tearing.
Force output would decrease, and therefore force resistance decreases as well. Like just every aspect of the muscle, flexibility and strength, is going to be proportionally compromised.
And I guess you can even say, an injury, you might even feel pain from it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, same thing with like connective tissue as well. Like, you need to make sure. So I actually have a connective tissue disorder. I have a genetic disorder. It's called Dupuytren's disease. And I think it's also called Viking's disease. And it's found almost exclusively in people, I think males of Scandinavian descent. What it does is it thickens the connective tissue on your palms where you receive stress.
Interesting.
So it's especially important for me to make sure that I keep my hands and my fingers strong and flexible. So because every time one of these nodules forms, I have like a couple, you won't be able to see them on camera, they're under the skin. I have a couple on this hand, I think one over here. As those form, it makes it far less flexible. Right? Because it's not actually like in the line of pull of the tendon itself. So it's really important for me to keep moving them all the time. If I don't, eventually it'll stay in like a contracted state. It's if anyone out there is morbidly curious, you can look at photographs of people with like advanced Dupuytren's disease. Their hands are like claws, like they can't even like open them.
Oh, damn.
Yep.
Yeah, I've actually experienced some of that feeling when I blow glass too often. Like when you blow glass, let's say 8-10 hours a day, you're constantly having to turn your hands. And if you let's say if I make a vase like this big and I make 5 of them in a row, by the end, all of this will be so tight and hurting that it's hard to even move my hand. So I have to be very careful and not overdo it so that I don't injure my hand. And when my friend's Phil, his doctor actually showed him this exercise to help prevent osteoporosis, where you squeeze your fingers in and out, and then you do your thumbs and you squeeze it in as much as you can and then out, and you keep doing that about 10 to 15 times. And that pain you feel in your joints is actually a little bit of that osteoporosis setting in.
It actually feels like this position here feels like a really good stretch.
It is.
Me. Like it's like really stretching.
Yeah.
In the way that I think I kind of needed for maybe all the climbing. Like that feels great. Yeah.
And you want to keep it moving out and in. And that, especially after like a long day of blowing glass, I do that, and it really helps release that tension.
Wow, that feels great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially with, you know, the amount of push-ups and strikes we do, it gets the wrist as well. So it's really important to stretch the wrist and build that wrist strength and mobility as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So take care of yourselves. And
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have some videos put up on our website of little exercises that you can do to help rehabilitate certain parts of your body, strengthen parts of your body that are commonly in pain, like, you know, lower back, especially hips, knees, shoulders. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, for people who are interested, we could do a video of a little 1 minute, you know, kind of mobilization. If you're sitting, get up, 1 minute, mobilize shoulders, hips, spine. Nothing crazy. Just get you nice and buttery smooth again
Yeah,
for the next 30-minute round of sitting, you know.
exactly. Yeah.
We all got to do it. We all got to sit at times, so.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel it just from sitting here.
Right? Yeah. It is interesting, like, the more that I go through my journey with this, and that's probably true for you too, the longer I can sit.
Yeah.
And I can be in some weird, like, I used to have to get up, especially playing guitar,
Yeah.
because you're like twisted in this weird, and you're like under tension, that I would feel achy if I didn't get up frequently.
Yeah.
I can just sit there now and like for like an hour straight and just get up, click, pop, like ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. I remember when it was probably 2 years ago, I was working and sitting too long, and I wasn't doing the right type of rehabilitation for my hips. And since I've started, you know, really taking care of that area, I can sit now through this podcast here without much pain, where before I'd be sitting here a half hour and I'd have to do stretching while sitting here. So definitely.
Oh, I can relate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I had all kinds of aches and pains.
Yeah.
So you enjoy life a lot more when you're not focusing on various discomforts, right? Hence why the whole, you know, lotus pose meditation, being able to sit longer. It's like,
Yeah.
you want to focus on your meditation, not on your back aching, your hip aching, you know. We want to focus on this podcast
Yeah.
and talking about martial arts, not about thinking I need to get up and stretch, you know.
Yeah. And that was especially, I felt that when I was traveling. So for the past 2 years, my partner Caroline and I had been traveling throughout the US, and we'd be taking, you know, 6 to 8 hour car rides. And those were the worst.
Yeah, there's not a lot like you can do
Except for just literally stopping.
Yep.
And, you know, so if you're out there driving, if you live full-time RV van life, stop every hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. Do yourself the favor. And I highly recommend not traveling more than 4 or 5 hours in a day if you're
ideally.
Yeah.
You know what was weird though was like I used to have really bad back pain on car rides. I used to probably about 30 minutes to an hour into a car ride feel horrible. But this was a long time ago before, you know, I really started getting interested in improving my health. So I drove down to visit Victor in Florida, in Miami.
Yeah.
Last year. And I only stopped, I think, once.
Oof.
And my back felt fine. I was like, how is this the same back
Yeah.
that couldn't get through like 30 minutes? And then it's like I just drove, what, 10 hours or something.
Yeah.
And I felt
That's
great.
more like 16.
Sick. I think you're right.
Yeah.
It was a really long time. I stopped like once or twice.
Ooh.
And yeah,
That's-
just goes to show like you can reach a point where your back can tolerate some pretty crazy stuff, but ideally stop.
Yeah.
Get out, stretch.
Like one of the things I do when I'm driving for long periods of times, I'll just literally squeeze my butt to help get that area tight.
I think I probably do.
contract.
Yeah. Or I'll like push against, you know how there's like the footrest for your left
push
foot?
with the left foot.
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
squeeze the belly, and that helps get all of this warm because as you're sitting there, it all just goes to sleep. Things get out of place. You start leaning
I
to
push
one
against
side.
the wheel and like rotate my scapula sometimes to like mobilize
up
my
the
upper
shoulder.
back, shoulders. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Little things you can do without having to get up.
Yeah, exactly. No, those you do them enough and it has a big impact overall.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and cruise control is your friend.
Yes.
You can
Yeah.
like sit in your chair symmetrically for a little while.
Yeah.
It definitely helps a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. So, take care of yourselves, get a massage, go in a sauna.
Yeah. Hot tub. Walk some laps in the pool. Walk
Yeah.
backward laps in the pool.
Yes.
Walk sideways laps in the pool.
Mm-hmm. Take care of your body and it will take care of you. Yeah. That's all we got for today.
Till next time, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See y'all.
Take care.
Thank you for joining Victor and Andy on The Unlimited You. Make sure to visit our website, www.feraacademy.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. If you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.